What do we do with the knowledge that George Floyd was not actually strangled to death by a cop?
We have to acknowledge the people that gave it to us and why. See, George Floyd is the Democratic Party's prototypical black man. These are the black men they are trying to create. So George Floyd has to be elevated. He has to be celebrated. He's perfect to them. He was poor, he was uneducated, he was a drug addict, he didn't have a job, he was down there begging and crying and asking the white people to not kill him. To a Democrat, to a white Democrat, this is the perfect black man.
No doubt by now you have an opinion about the incident that occurred back in May of 2020 between George Floyd and Derek Chauvin. The 8-minute plus clip seen around the world repeatedly and shown to us repeatedly by various news networks seemingly showed Derek Chauvin have his knee on George Floyd's neck during an arrest, which supposedly caused his death, George Floyd's death. So for me, I wanted to see the actual body cam footage because personally, I believe the media just lies repeatedly to push a narrative. But we didn't see that footage until well after the Summer of Love riots, which caused damage to buildings, which caused churches to be burned down, which caused lives to be lost, livelihoods to be lost. We didn't see the full footage until the trial started. I believe it was months or years later. And if you saw the actual full body cam footage, you'd have seen that Derek Chauvin's knee was not on George Floyd's neck, but actually on his back or on his shoulder, something like that. Yet, because of public opinion, all 4 officers, I believe, are now in prison. But during that whole time, it was speculated and now confirmed without a doubt that George Floyd did not die of asphyxiation. He in fact died of fentanyl overdose. Matter of fact, I believe soon after his death, when the initial autopsy happened, it did indicate that drugs were in his system and it was due to a fentanyl overdose. But now we have conclusive, without a doubt, evidence based on a current hearing that's going on right now that it was in fact fentanyl overdose, not asphyxiation, that led to George Floyd's death. Now, Tucker Carlson has a guest on his program, and I'm going to let this run completely through. And I want to get your opinion about what you hear from this guest, because I agree with most, if not everything, this guest had to say. But before we begin, please like, share, and subscribe. Hit that notification bell to get notified of future videos. Timestamps are below. And let's begin.
Now that we know that it was not in fact a pandemic of the unvaccinated, now that we know that Ukraine is not actually winning the war against Russia, it could be time to revisit some of the other slogans we've been assured are true and ordered to repeat. Are they in fact true? Did, for example, a racist white cop actually murder a man called George Floyd, a civil rights leader, in Minneapolis on Memorial Day of 2020? Now, we've been told that happened, told it relentlessly for more than 3 years. So at this point, we've been told it so much that pretty much everybody seems to believe it. And because everyone does kind of believe it, a small group of people has been allowed to make massive changes to American society. They include, but are not limited to, decriminalizing stealing, defunding the police, adding a new federal holiday to the calendar called Juneteenth, the ceasing of hiring all white men in corporate America, and of course, significantly, they also sent a cop called Derek Chauvin to prison for more than 40 years. He would be the racist white devil who murdered George Floyd. But the question is, did he actually murder George Floyd? And the answer is, well, no, he didn't murder George Floyd. And we're not guessing about that. We know it conclusively, thanks to a new court case now underway in Hennepin County, Minnesota. The case was brought by a prosecutor there called Amy Sweezy. She's suing her boss. So the case is not actually about George Floyd or Derek Chauvin, but it tells you an awful lot about both of them. In her deposition, which you should read, Amy Sweezy describes a conversation that she had with the county medical examiner, Andrew Baker, right after George Floyd died. Quote, I called Dr. Baker early that morning to tell him about the case and to ask him if he would perform the autopsy on Mr. Floyd. Sweezy recalls all this under oath in the deposition. Quote, he called me later in the day on that Tuesday, and he told me that there were no medical findings that showed any injury to the vital structures of Mr. Floyd's neck. There were no medical indications of asphyxia or strangulation. Oh. In other words, George Floyd, according to the official autopsy, was not murdered. He died instead of what we used to call natural causes, which in his case would include decades of drug use, as well as the fatal concentration of fentanyl that was in his system on his final day. So this was not a killing. It was yet another narcotics OD in a country that records more than 100,000 of them every year. The medical examiner clearly understood that and in fact articulated it. And Sweezy explains. He said to me, she recalls in the deposition, Amy, what happens when the actual evidence doesn't match up with the public narrative that everyone's already decided on? And then he said, quote, this is the kind of case that ends careers. In other words, everyone lied about it from the very beginning. The people who knew the truth hid the truth and allowed the revolution to proceed. Now they've been exposed. Now we know the truth. What happens next? Well, they're going to ignore it. The Biden administration just issued a long purple statement celebrating George Floyd's birthday. He's a martyr, despite the fact we know that he was not murdered. And by the way, Derek Chauvin is still languishing in jail for the rest of his life. So how do we respond to this? How do we respond to the truth once we have it? Well, Vince Everett Ellison seemed like a good man to ask. He's the author of Crime, Inc. He joins us now. Vince, thanks so much for coming on. So as with so many other stories, the origin
thanks for having me, Tucker.
Of COVID, it's a blessing to have you. We now know what actually happened, but the question then is, what do you do with that knowledge? We know that the US government, Tony Fauci, worked with the Chinese to create the virus that overturned the American economy, but what do we do with that knowledge? What do we do with the knowledge that George Floyd was not actually strangled to death by a cop?
We have to acknowledge the people that gave it to us and why. See, George Floyd is the Democratic Party's prototypical black man. These are the black men they are trying to create. So George Floyd has to be elevated. He has to be celebrated. He's perfect to them. He was poor, he was uneducated, he was a drug addict, he didn't have a job, he was down there begging and crying and asking the white people to not kill him. To a Democrat, to a white Democrat, this is the perfect black man. So he has to be elevated. Look, not a few days ago, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden celebrated hip-hop music. They had a celebration of hip-hop.
Hip-hop culture is America's culture. It is a genre. It is music and melody and rhyme. And hip-hop is also an ethos.
A music genre that calls the black man the N-word, calls women the W word and the B word, talks about misogyny, shooting police, smoking dope, selling dope, fighting, killing, acting a fool. They celebrated this genre. Why? Because this is how they see black America. They see us the same way they see George Floyd. And they have to make more of us because everywhere they rule, John F. Kennedy stood in front of the Berlin Wall in the 60s and said, if you think that communism is great, let them come to Berlin. Well, if you think that the Democratic Party is great, let them come to Detroit. Let them come to Chicago. Let them come to St. Louis. Let them come to LA, Portland, Seattle, Memphis. Anywhere where they rule, you will see George Floyd's all over the place. And they're proud of them. In Baltimore, Maryland, they spend $21,000 per child for every child up there inside the school district. Not one school is proficient in math, science, or reading. But they keep it going every year. Why? Because they're producing George Floyd.
But
and George Floyd's vote for the Democrat Party.
But why would, when most of us, you, me, I think all normal people look at George Floyd's life, you think this is a disaster. This guy never added anything. He took a lot in prison at least 8 times. I mean, his life was a tragedy at best. Why would you want more people like that?
Because he votes for the Democrat Party. And then he teaches his children to vote for the Democrat Party. And then these white Democrats can feel superior to him. Yeah. He can be controlled by them. Just like, think about an old slave plantation, Tucker, back in the day. how they wanted their slaves to act. Subservient, obedient, ignorant, doing what he was told, not asking any questions, having a slave mind, being dependent on them. This is how they want black men to be in America. This is how they want the whole black community to be. This is why it started in the civil rights movement. When Martin Luther King Jr. in his I Have a Dream speech said, 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, the Negro is still not free. He said 5 times in that speech that we were not free. It turned the Declaration of Independence on its head, because in our Declaration of Independence it said that our freedom was an unalienable right given us by God. John Locke in his second treatise of government said that an unalienable right is a right given from God. It is irrevocable, non-transferable, and unsellable. The government cannot touch it. It supersedes law. It supersedes the Constitution. However, King said that we was coming to government and to the white man for our right to be free. Even at the end of the speech, he said, on some certain day, we'll be free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we're free at last. He said in that speech, when will we be satisfied? He said, we will never be satisfied until justice rolls down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. That's a fancy way of saying never. And so black people heard that speech and said that we were not free here in America. And we make our children recite that speech every single year on King's birthday. And they say in that speech, the Negro is still not free. George Floyd was a slave in his mind. And the civil rights movement caused him to be a slave in his mind. And today they're still marching, 60 years later, telling black people, you're not free. Beg for reparations, beg for affirmative action, kill your children in the womb, cut off your child, you castrate your children, let drag queens come into school and shake their behinds in your children's faces, run God out of the public square, and then they end up like George Floyd. But the one thing they do consistently is they vote for the Democrat Party, and the places where George Floyd's live, they stay in absolute power.
That's a pretty dark explanation. So you're saying that the Democratic Party as an organization intentionally degrades black people to keep them compliant and obedient.
Oh yes, in my book Crime Inc. I talk about one of the main things they do, like the mafia and organized crime. They humiliate black people. They demoralize them. It's a Marxist construct. They demoralize their people. They beat them down. They tell them that they're victims. Well, it was Martin Luther King Jr. that said, they tell you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, how can you pull yourself up by your bootstraps when you're bootless? He told us we were bootless. You have black preachers, and you've heard, about my iron triangle, the black preacher, the black politician, the black civil rights worker. They go into the black community. Consistently, you're a victim. You're oppressed. The country hates you. Well, see, I look at them and I say, I'm a black man, but I cannot be oppressed. You know why? Because I'm a child of God. I'm an heir of Jesus Christ. I cannot be a victim. Why? Because I'm an heir of Jesus Christ. I'm a child of God. I cannot be a victim. See, they tell these people to go against their religion and their basic ideology, because most black men say they're Christians, right? But then they walk around saying, I'm oppressed. I'm a victim. I'm afraid. 365 times in our Bible, they tell us to fear not. Yet they walk around saying they're afraid in the United States of America. LeBron James said he's afraid. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar says he's afraid. Kaepernick said he's afraid. Well, I'm a black man in America, and I'm not afraid of a damn thing. I don't ask for permission in my own house. America is my home. So as they walk around here crying, talking about, I'm frightened, I'm afraid, I can't make it, please help me, I tell them they stink in my nostrils. They're an affront to God. The flip side of white male intimidation during the civil rights was also black male cowardice. They laid down and let them beat them, slap them around, rape their wives and their children. Well, no, not me, never me. I'm a free man. I live in the United States of America. They say it's an honor to be, that there's white supremacy and that white people have some type of privilege. Well, as I said before, it is a privilege to be white, but it's also a privilege to be black. And it's a privilege to be an American. And it's really a privilege to be a Christian in the United States of America, the greatest country on the face of this earth. And they're not going to make a George Floyd out of me. I stand up strong. I look them in the eye. And I said, I'm a free man. My freedom comes from God. It's an unalienable right given to me by him. You cannot touch it. And if you try it, I got 2 things that'll get you off of me. Jesus and my 38. Come try me out.
So So the Democratic Party used BLM as a domestic militia in the last presidential cycle, 2020, to defeat Donald Trump. Do you expect something like that to happen again?
Well, you see how they use the same tactics as Iran. Iran has Hezbollah and Hamas as their militias. And the Democratic Party uses BLM and Antifa as theirs, throwing the rock and hiding the hand. Of course they're going to do it. They've always done it. Even at the beginning, they used the Ku Klux Klan for the military reign. Now they're using BLM, they're using Antifa, they're using NAACP, and they're their suicide bombers. They're their shock troops. They're their brown shirts. They're their street soldiers. And they're going to go out there, and I guarantee you, Tucker, they're going to look over all the black-on-black violence. They're going to look over all the black men killing black men. They're going to look over all the snatching grabs and all the burning and all the fighting and looting and acting a fool. And they're going to find one crazy white cop that's going to do something to some crazy black man, and then they're going to try to burn this country down for it. That's their plan. That's their template. I hope America's ready for it because it's coming. And it always works for them. It always works because the press and everybody's just waiting. Oh, they're on the starting line just waiting for it. And as soon as they find that golden kill, watch them go crazy with it. BLM is going to start getting their money from the Democrat Party because that's who they get it from. The same way that Hamas gets their money from Iran. BLM gets their money from the Democrat Party. And BLM does not stand for Black Lives Matter. It stands for burn, loot, and murder. And that's what we should call them from now on.
Vince Everett Ellison, Bible in a 38. It's great to see you today. Thank you very much.
So I agree with everything that gentleman had to say there, including what he said about MLK. I'm not going to go into it, but I'm even a little more critical on MLK now that I've grown to know him a little more. But that's another video. What that gentleman said about George Floyd, okay, and how the Democrats use someone like George Floyd as the quintessential black man, put on a pedestal, a beacon, okay? That's how Democrats see us. And again, what Malcolm X said about the white liberal.
There are many whites who are trying to solve the problem, but you never see them going under the label of liberals. That white person that you see calling himself a liberal is the most dangerous thing in the entire Western Hemisphere. He's the most deceitful. He's like a fox. And a fox is always more dangerous in the forest than the wolf. You can see the wolf coming. You know what he's up to. But the fox will fool you. He comes at you with his mouth shaped in such a way that even though you see his teeth, you think he's smiling and you take him for a friend.
They love to prop up someone like, oh, look at George Floyd. Oh, look at him. So they feel better. They feel better about themselves. I also want to say that Derek Chauvin, as this article says right here, he should be free. He should be out of prison. The whole thing was just based on public opinion. And the media narrative pushed down our throats so much in 2020 was that this guy was guilty when he actually was not. Okay, I'm willing to say it. Are you willing to believe that? Are you willing to look at the evidence, not your feelings, but the evidence, and see that this man is actually innocent and should be let go? I don't know about his life in general. I don't know what he's done outside of this. I don't know. I don't care. That's not what this is about. This is about an officer doing his job and being put in prison for a crime he did not commit. In fact, his method of arrest was detailed in the handbook for Minneapolis PD. Okay, he did not go outside of that, yet he is he is spending 40 years in prison. So I want you to really think about this. Is George Floyd the type of guy that deserved murals painted for him, multiple funerals? Is that this guy? Is that the guy that you look to? Or are you relating to him because you feel that you're like him because of a skin color? Is that what it is? I want to know your opinion about this because, again, I believe that George Floyd is not an example of what anyone should be, including someone in the black community. Democrats prop up people who you yourself wouldn't want to be like, or your parents wouldn't want you to be like. Okay? And they don't prop up people, conservatives. They don't prop up people who do the right thing, who are strong-minded, God-fearing. They don't prop up people like that. Do you understand? The media doesn't do that either. Again, the media is an arm of the Democrat Party. But let's go over this article briefly. And it's from Revolver. Free Derek Chauvin now. October 23rd, 2020. This won't come as a shock to you, but nearly everything you were told about the George Floyd case and the conviction of police officer Derek Chauvin was a lie. Newly released court documents now confirm that George Floyd died from fentanyl overdose, not from asphyxiation. In other words, George Floyd was not murdered. And as you can see here, no life-threatening injuries identified. And down below, fentanyl. Toxicology reports confirm this, as you can see right here. Despite this knowledge, both the prosecution and the court still permitted Derek Chauvin to be wrongfully convicted for a crime he did not commit. He was a sacrificial lamb led to slaughter to appease the bloodthirsty BLM mob and support the mainstream media's lies. Operation Mockingbird, people. Operation Mockingbird. Even as some of us began questioning the mainstream narrative, media outlets, including Fox News, threw Chauvin to the wolves. The man never stood a fighting chance. Imagine if this guy was you. Imagine if Chauvin was you. You were doing your duty as an officer of the law, following the letter of the law by the book, and you were thrown in prison because of public opinion, fueled by the Democrats and the mainstream media. Here, Jack Posobiec, he posts, never forget Sean Hannity threw Derek Chauvin to the wolves. Sean Hannity's a neocon, so I'm not surprised by his opinion. We all know the damage dirty cops can cause the country as a whole. The fact is, as I've been saying every single day, the horrific actions of one officer and the inaction of 3 officers resulted in the death of an innocent man, fellow American, and this should never have happened. Well, of course Hannity would say that. As it stands now, Chauvin is a political prisoner. He's been judged not only by an activist legal system that no longer follows the rule of law, but instead goes by the court of public opinion. In this case, it seems the verdict on Chauvin was influenced more by public outcry and a sketchy viral image than by a thorough examination of the facts. It's clear that the rabid left-wing mob placed tremendous pressure on prosecutors, the jury, and the entire court system. And I believe that Chauvin is appealing, and this may go to the Supreme Court. And will the Supreme Court, if it reaches there, will the Supreme Court first take the case? And number 2, will they acquit Derek Chauvin? Based on everything that's come out, that'll be interesting to see. Very interesting to see. New court documents expose the extreme pressure prosecutors face in Hennepin County to charge Derek Chauvin and 3 other former Minneapolis police officers in the death of George Floyd. Several attorneys opposed charging the other 3 officers and withdrew from the case due to professional and ethical rules. Now, hundreds of pages of sworn testimony of Hennepin County attorneys and other county employees that took place this summer have been made public. Depositions were conducted in relation to a lawsuit filed by Amy Sweesey, who was one of the officer's top prosecutors, against former county attorney Mike Friedman. Sweesey is suing after settling a claim with the Minneapolis Department of Human Rights alleging that Friedman engaged in sex discrimination and retaliation in the office. Hennepin County agreed to pay $190,000 to settle the Department of Human Rights claim. Friedman left office in January, and Sweesey resigned from the current county attorney's office in April. According to the new documents, Senior Assistant County Attorney Patrick Lofton, who worked on police use of force cases with Sweesey, said the relationship between Sweesey and Friedman soured after Lofton and Sweesey withdrew from the officers' cases formally on June 3rd, 2020. Lofton explained the pressure they were under to file charges. The Chauvin stuff is the catalyst of this, Lofton said, according to a transcript from his June 6th deposition. There was extreme premium pressure, yes. The city was burning down, Lofton said. He explained that while he wanted the case charged and believed that there was probable cause to charge Chauvin with third-degree murder, the pressure from outside the office was insane, and he had reservations about charging the other 3 officers. There were no injuries to George Floyd, and everybody knew it. Dr. Baker, I don't remember if he said he would do it or not, but he did do it. He called me later in the day on that Tuesday, and he told me that there were no medical findings that showed any injury to the vital structures of Mr. Floyd's neck. There were no medical indications of asphyxia or strangulation. He said to me, Amy, what happens when the actual evidence doesn't match up with the public narrative that everyone's already decided on? And then he said, this is the kind of case that ends careers. Chauvin is seeking to appeal his conviction to the Supreme Court. Will the justices agree to hear the case in light of the unearthed evidence? One would think they almost have to. The bottom line is that George Floyd's cause of death was a fentanyl overdose, not asphyxiation from Derek Chauvin's knee. And don't forget, this fact was established early in the investigation, yet the narrative of Floyd being killed by a police officer was absolutely crucial for fueling the BLM revolution. And indeed, it did just that. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. An innocent man is in prison. I believe all 4 officers are in prison right now because they just did their job. They did their job. But what do you think? Do you think Derek Chauvin should be in prison? Do you think he actually, despite all the evidence coming out, do you think he still had a cause in George Floyd's death? Or do you believe he should be out of prison and there's some injustice going on, fueled by the Democrat Party and the mainstream media? And what do you think about BLM? Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment below. Let me know. And until the next one, take care.